Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen with another 5-year term after Sunday's election, but the outcome does not sit well with some of the others in the country. Discussions going on Cambodia's political future and its economy right after this break. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The program comes to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Now let's move on to Cambodia's political future. The ruling Cambodian People's Party has won the majority vote in Sunday's general election, according to the country's National Election Committee. That will allow Prime Minister Hun Sen to remain in office for another 5-year term. Mr. Hun Sen has been in power for the past 33 years. While 20 different political parties fielded the candidates in the race, the ruling CPP was awarded nearly 78% of the total vote tally, earning them all of the 125 parliamentary seats. The official results are set to be released in mid-August, a few weeks from now.
The outcome of the election was never in doubt. Only the scale of the victory by the Cambodian People's Party and Hun Sen and the size of the voter turnout. With the main opposition party, the Cambodia National Rescue Party, ordered disbanded by the Supreme Court late last year, and despite 19 smaller parties running, the CPP is set for a landslide win. The election committee put voter turnout at 82%, surprisingly high given the CNRP's absence and boycott call.
The voting went well. The people were happy to vote because there was good safety and security, no intimidation and no significant or remarkable issues which affected the election.
Cambodia has enjoyed strong economic growth over the past 2 decades. But the government needs to make sure the benefits are more evenly spread, improve education, boost skills and productivity, and entrenched poverty remains a serious concern. Though the incoming government might not face much pressure from the opposition in the National Assembly, there will be no dimming of expectations from Cambodia's people for continued improvement to their lives.
For more on the Cambodian election, we are joined in our Beijing studio by Luo Yongkwon, who is an Associate Research Fellow from the Center of South and Southeast Asia and Oceania Studies of the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. And in Singapore, we have Lin Tan-Wai, who is an Adjunct Research Fellow at National University of Singapore. I want to welcome to both of you, Mr. Luo and Mr. Lim. May I start with you, Mr. Luo, about the election result, the turnout, 80%. That is really quite something. Mr. Luo.
Yes, I think this turnout is quite very high. I think why it is very high because the Hun Sen government has made very good preparations. Before the election, as I know, that the senior officials, including the Vice Prime Minister and the ministers, they go to the provinces and the cities to ask and discuss and communicate with the local voters. They explain what is the election, how to vote in the election day. So originally, the government, they just expected 60% of the turnout. But at last, they found that they got the 80% turnout.
That's right. Members of the opposition challenged the Cambodian election, though, with calls for a boycott. But voter turnout, as we discussed earlier, was a key test for the Prime Minister Hun Sen's mandate. While the voter turnout in 2013 stood at 69%, Sunday's general election reached 80%. That's the number. You see the comparison over there. And therefore, Mr. Lim, despite the opposition parties, candidates, their hard work, despite some of the different voices coming from the rest of the international community, it seems that Mr. Hun Sen and his party are doing extremely well. This time the turnout really says something, 80%.
Yes, in the past, turnout has been between 60-something%, as you have mentioned. And at one point of time, there was also a turnout of 90-something%. So 82% is a good turnout. And as you have mentioned, despite the call by the opposition to boycott the election, it appears the turnout is good. And one reason is because Prime Minister Hun Sen's government has made very strong statements telling the people to come out to vote as a part of their duty, and also to not heed the opposition party's call to boycott the polls. And I think the strong words and the speeches have actually contributed to people turning out and vote. And it appears this reflects the sort of confidence that the dominant party has had. Of course, there are critics of the election as well, and some critics, especially from the West, mentioned that there had been sort of dominance by the party in power, and also some unfairness in the election. So I think it's time for reconciliation and to sort out some of the nation-building issues before the various factions within the Cambodian election.
That is exactly the key, isn't it? I mean, after all, a government has to deliver in order to win confidence and eventually the votes. It's the same, I guess, in Cambodia to a certain extent, and therefore, Mr. Luo, about the economic development, Cambodia has been quite active compared to earlier times, as the country has been in peace for quite some time. Tell us exactly what Mr. Han Sen and his party has committed that would really, from your perspective, could get Cambodia on a longer term of prosperity.
Yes, of course. I think the economic development is very important for Mr. Hun Sen because it can help him to gain the political support. I give an example. If you see from 2013 to 2018, the economic growth rate has around at 7%. 7% means it's very high for the Cambodia, which is a very low-income country. This is one thing. The second thing is about this poverty rate. I can give you another figure that the poverty rate in 2007 is more than 47%, but in 2014 is around the 14%, which means it is very, very helpful for the country's society. And I remember that I visited a workshop in suburb of Phnom Penh that the government has helped the disabled people, even the men, young women, and the children, to give them a lot of job opportunities, to teach them to do the handcraft, to learn to teach them how to draw. So that means that the government has done a lot to help the disabled people, or they call the vulnerable groups, to help them get the opportunities. So Mr. Hun Sen has made great contributions to the country's economic development and social security.
We understand you visit the country pretty often, Mr. Luo, but many would say, have you been shown to all aspects of the Cambodia life in order to draw that conclusion? And therefore, I want to go to you, Mr. Lim, as well, about that. I mean, after all, Cambodia has to look for a sustainable way of economic growth. And the Cambodian government has to really deliver after decades of war and also chaos in the country. And therefore, Mr. Lin, from your perspective, what could be that road of economic prosperity?
I think Prime Minister Hun Sen's government is often characterized as a strongman regime. And a strongman regime typically has a social contract with the electorate that they need to deliver bread and butter results, outcome, economic growth, and as your program has mentioned, it also needs to have a social equity in distribution of wealth. And so these are the main challenges that the government face. At the same time, Cambodia has reached out to major powers in the region like China in the Belt and Road Initiative, and also work with ASEAN countries to build up the ASEAN economic community. So these are avenues in which it can sort of work with regional partners in order to sort of carry on with its economic development and make it sustainable, and also to learn from the best practices of major powers in the region as well as ASEAN. So Cambodia has a long road ahead it needs to sort of work with various stakeholders,
right,
including domestically with the critics as well as the opposition parties as well.
Mr. Luo, Cambodia is a very unique country. Of course, every country is unique in their own way, but Cambodia is really one of those unique ones. For example, it is a very religious country, but at the same time, it has a long history of being the colony of the West. Well, after the revolution, shall we say, and the evolution in the country has chosen a path which, as Mr. Lim had just said, getting closer to China, its neighbor, and also the ASEAN countries as well. So how do you see Cambodia is trying to work with all of these remedies at the same time and bring out its own way of development? Once again, I want to have you to address some specific questions, Mr. Luo.
Yes, I think Cambodia identifies itself as two countries. First one is Cambodia is the less developed country. The second one, Cambodia is the ASEAN country. The less developed country means Cambodia should work with all the countries outside the region or inside the region for the economic cooperation in order to help the country's economic development. That's why since the end of the Cold War, the Cambodia worked with Japan, United States, EU countries, China, even the United Nations for the foreign investment and foreign aid. Secondly is Cambodia attaches great importance to the ASEAN countries because Cambodia is in Southeast Asia and Cambodia has very special relations with Vietnam, with Laos. So if you look at the foreign investments flow into the Cambodia, apart from the big countries like China and Japan and the United States, the ASEAN countries has a very big resources of the foreign investments. So I can say Cambodia in the future, it wants to cooperate with all the countries, including US and Japan, even though these countries, they say that the election is illegal, but they will try to cooperate with these countries. So in my opinion, in the future, the door is open, and it depends on the Western countries how to have the relations with Cambodia. Cambodia wants to cooperate with them, but without any political preconditions.
I see. Mr. Lim, that is an interesting question, isn't it? You see, not only Cambodia, but also countries like Myanmar, the development of that and their own agenda do not necessarily have been agreed upon by so-called the traditional West, and therefore there are some very different discussions and ways of doing things these countries have chosen so far. So, Mr. Lim, what do you make of that fact about these developed countries in Asia?
These countries are commonly known as the CLMV countries, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. They are seen as latecomers to capitalist market-driven development. So a lot of them are still trying to find the hybrid model in which it fits some of their political characteristics, but at the same time bring about economic development. And this hybridization of in some of these countries socialist economy, in other countries strongman political systems, a lot of them requires a special sort of adaptation to local conditions. And so they look to various best practices in the West, as the other speaker has mentioned, in the US, in Japan's developmental model,
right,
and also to China in its hybridized model as well of development, socialism with capitalism, and also various ASEAN sort of early developers model. So eventually they would have to adapt and indigenize all these conditions to their own unique culture and political systems, and come up with their own sort of nation-building development.
Their own remedy, as they say. Mr. Luo, very briefly from you before we wrap up.
Yes, I think in the future for Cambodia, the most important thing is to make very good relations with the opposition parties. Even though the opposition parties now they have called the boycott, but I think for the Hun Sen government, it should have cooperate with the opposition parties on the one hand, and on the other hand to collaborate with the international community, ask for more and more investment and techniques from the international community. That is very vital for the investments, for the country's development and society.
Right. not only to be straightforward in trying to embrace what is their own way of doing things, but also at the same time balance that with the cooperation with the others. Thank you so much for the two of you helping us better understand the latest about Cambodia. Really appreciate it. Luo Yongkwon and Lin Tan-Wai. Thank you. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight, CGTN, into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.